InfoWars host and Alex Jones associate Owen Shroyer was sentenced to 2 months behind bars for his role in connection with the January 6 riots. Now, Shroyer entered a guilty plea back in June. His plea deal included aiding January 6 investigators. Shroyer spoke out against the court's decision, saying he doesn't want to go to jail and the case should be done on the basis that he carried out his probation. Here he is on Tim Pool's podcast. Let's watch.
Then there's the other side of me that's just an American citizen. I remove myself from the picture, and it breaks my heart. It breaks my heart that future Americans may have to suffer through the same fate or worse. It breaks my heart that somebody, a young journalist coming up or a talk show is coming up, is going to have to censor themselves, chill their free speech, or be afraid.
That's the thing.
Be afraid of what they're going to say.
Shroyer didn't go into the Capitol building during the riot, but prosecutors argued that by spreading conspiracy theories in 2020 election denial claims online and on his show, The War Room with Owen Shroyer, he helped fuel an environment that resulted in the insurrection. He received a misdemeanor charge of entering or remaining on restricted grounds.
Yeah, so this, I'm a little confused by this, to be honest. So they're saying he did not go into the Capitol, but the charge was entering or staying on restricted grounds. So I guess that means some outdoor area of the Capitol that they technically weren't supposed to be on.
Yeah.
Now, look, this is a 2-month sentence, nothing like the 20, 30 years we're seeing for Proud Boys leaders.
And it's half of what prosecutors apparently were seeking.
And I do think, I've argued on the show, I think people who engage in trespassing or violence or destruction of property should, in fact, be sentenced along those lines. So this doesn't strike me as an overly harsh sentence, for trespassing, although, again, it doesn't sound like he actually went in the Capitol. I am a little bit perturbed about the whole, again, the speech element of his advocacy or the things he said about the election on his show being used against him or saying that he's incited. Because, again, the charge is just that he went somewhere he wasn't supposed to be. So it seems a little concerning to me to rope in the speech-related stuff.
Yeah, it's unclear what role that commentary played in his actual sentencing.
Well, like if you're charging him for inciting a riot, charge him for inciting a riot.
But they didn't.
They didn't.
And so, again, I understand why you would be concerned about the idea that someone just talking about doing a 1-6 on their podcast would lead you to go in jail. But it's not clear to me that that's actually what happened on paper, right? Alex Jones hasn't been charged in connection with 1-6. Donald Trump hasn't been charged with the insurrection, saying things. The indictment out of Georgia was very specific and very clear that it wasn't about anything that he said on 1-6, even though there was mention of that stuff in the indictment, but that the crimes that he was charged with had to do with the manipulation of the slates of electors in the weeks leading up to 1-6. So again, I don't know if this is one of those cases where the indictment references the broader context of what was going on to give a better understanding of what the context was, but doesn't actually charge him or try to criminalize speech in any way. I mean, that would obviously be bad.
Prosecutors did argue, it's in the documents the prosecutors put together, I'm quoting from them now, that he helped create the atmosphere that resulted in the insurrection based on the things he said. Those are the court filings.
Right, but people say that. You can say that about Donald Trump and any other person, but that doesn't mean that they've actually been charged with illegal speech, unlawful speech, or anything like that. It is frustrating because, we're in a position right now where there's been an indictment out of Georgia, the same court that issued the Trump charges, where 61 Cop City protesters have been charged with domestic terrorism and a number of other charges for the crime of passing out flyers, like literally passing out flyers, raising money for a bail fund.
Well, right, then I think you agree. Like this can be a prosecutor dirty tactic to include in the court filings things that might be indicative of bad behavior or guilt or something, which isn't even in the case you're describing. But, but it's something bad, but then they're not actually charging it, and it's not being...
Well, right, but in that case, I think there are some people who did do some property damage in the course of their protests, but there are people that are being charged where there is no underlying crime. So in this case, if he trespassed, well, that's the underlying crime. I just Googled it. Trespassing penalties apparently range from several days to several months in jail. So this is in the middle of that. It seems like normal. But when you're truly criminalizing activity, there's no underlying crime, just criminalizing, passing out flyers. A bunch of people were charged for having attended a concert, a music concert. They were there, they got rounded up, they're in there. And it's not clear where these cases are gonna go, but there's a chilling effect, right? Are you going to want to raise money to get those people out of jail if people have been thrown in jail for raising money for other people who have been thrown in jail? Are you going to be willing to attend a demonstration if people who have attended a concert that is vaguely related to the Cop City movement are being thrown in jail?
I think that's very concerning.
Are you going to want to send an email? Or if flyers are being criminalized, are you going to want to send an email? Even if these people don't end up getting convicted because the charges are flimsy, they're still having to pay these legal fees. They're still spending time in jail, awaiting bail. Their lives are disrupted. They might not be able to keep their jobs, et cetera, if they're losing the time off. And it's an intimidation tactic. And to specifically apply these domestic terrorism charges to crimes like this is increasingly something that we're seeing with protesters on, in this case, environmental protesters. Cop City is both an environmental issue and a criminal justice issue. More obvious environmental protesters, the kinds of which are trying to stop pipelines being built, et cetera. Because I do think the governments are realizing that the more there's a gap between what the people that elect them want and what they're willing to do, people are going to increasingly give up on the democratic process and be turning to different kinds of protests that have worked in the past, and they want to stop that and discourage that at all costs.
I mean, so we're seeing that in those cases, and we're seeing it in this case, in the January 6th case, with the terrorism enhancement was why Tarrio and Big and the other guy got those very lengthy sentences. Yeah, again, I'm looking again at the filings. They said Shroyer stoked the flames of a potential disruption of the certification vote by streaming disinformation about alleged voter fraud in a stolen election. Again, that's just how they're describing him. He's not being charged for that. He's not getting a long sentence. But I'm bothered by them even putting streaming disinformation about alleged voter fraud as something that is like, again, they're not literally charging it, but they're trying to create this person of this. You're allowed to stream disinformation.
Yeah.
You're not. This has not been criminalized. We have not criminalized. Like the thought police are coming in here and trying to prevent you from sharing information that, again, I think is wrong, is likely wrong, but it's not always wrong. We have plenty of examples, not so much on the election front, but on things that are being criminalized as disinformation, where the story is incomplete. There's a lot more to it, and we're just, I think, going down a very dark place. And it's not because I have some special sympathy to the January 6th crowd, like you point out, all sorts of other protesters this could be used against all over the place. And dissident movement. I mean, anyone. We all have an interest in protecting our First Amendment rights.
I mean, you were there as a
rights.
journalist, and what if you stood in some spot? What if the crowd moved you to some spot that they could technically say was trespass? I mean, what kind of chilling of journalistic endeavors is that going to create? I mean, in this, I completely agree with you that they need to be very careful about the language that they're concluding in these indictments, because the heavy implication is that doing the non-criminal activity is all but criminalized and being targeted. In the Cop City indictment, they list as one part of this RICO conspiracy that someone signed their name. One of the protesters wrote the names ACAB on a document.
That means all cops are bastards. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm sorry, I'm not allowed to write that I don't like cops on a piece of paper. There's a lengthy description of what anarchism is. Are you not allowed to be an anarchist in America? Am I not allowed to have a political belief? That stuff is terrifying. And I do wish there were more liberals who are willing. I think there's plenty of people on the left who've been critical of the 1-6 indictments, the Glenn Greenwalds and stuff of the world. But the liberals have been Trump derangement out of really calling this out at all.
The Huffington Post, we got another one. It's like they're hunting these people down.
Yeah.
And again, I don't think you should get off scot-free for trespassing at the Capitol or
part of
violence,
civil disobedience is that you do the crime, you pay the time. Civil rights protesters broke the law. They went places that was illegal for them to go. because they were black, and they sat at the lunch counters and they did the thing and they got thrown in jail, and Dr. King wrote his letters from Birmingham jail, and all of those things happened. Like, it's that is supposed to be that is part of the cost you pay to protest, but increasingly criminalizing things that are not illegal, speech-related things, but also other kinds of activities, and
rounding up things that are small crimes, are crimes with not insane sentences, and and paying as we've discussed before, the trial penalty of actually wanting to go to trial and argue to a judge or a jury that this is not just what's happening to you, you didn't commit it. You can't risk that, because then you end up like Enrique Tarrio, who wasn't even there on January 6th, 30 years.
And it's worth noting that liberals are also largely ignoring Cop City. Not in Atlanta. I think there's a lot of groups that worked hard to knock on doors and elect Democrats, elect Joe Biden and win him the Senate, et cetera, who are deeply frustrated by the Democratic Party at large's choice to turn a blind eye to the broad consensus that's emerged in the area against the building of Cop City. I actually spoke to one of the protesters in an upcoming episode of Bad Faith Podcast that I think is going to come out next week, and he and a lawyer who's involved in these cases were pointing out the kind of conflict of interest between management of Atlanta, including black mayors and black legislators who seem to be more invested in the personal remuneration and kind of financial windfall that comes from hosting Olympics and hosting the World Cup and hosting things like that and bringing that activity to the city than actually reflecting the interests of the constituents that already live there, who don't want this $90 million to be wasted on a police training facility that is not well geared to actually lowering crime in the area, is an environmental hellhole that is going to strip away acres of the only kind of green land in the area, and which resulted in the murder of this young protester who was shot by the police almost 50 times and killed. This is the America we're living in, and the silence from what the group, the wing of the party that's supposed to be all about protecting these kinds of rights, both with respect to the civil liberties violations and the overreach with 1-6 people and these protesters down in Atlanta, is really galling to me.
We'll have more Rising right after this.